I had been lying in that hospital bed for 3 days before my wife finally showed up. Not with flowers, not with a thermos of soup the way she used to bring when I had the flu back in our 30s. She walked in on a Tuesday afternoon wearing the camel coat I had bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago, and she was carrying a manila envelope. I knew what was in it before she even set it down on the tray table. I had broken both legs in a fall from a scaffolding at a renovation site in Tucson. 31 years in construction, and I had never once come off a ladder wrong. One bad step on a wet plank at 62 years old, and suddenly I was staring at a ceiling with 2 casts from ankle to knee and a morphine drip in my left arm. The doctors said I would walk again. They said it with a kind of careful optimism that tells you the road back is going to be long and ugly. My wife did not seem interested in the road back. She sat down in the chair beside my bed and folded her hands in her lap the way she always did when she had already made up her mind about something and was just waiting for me to catch up. "I think you know why I'm here," she said. I looked at the envelope. "You could have called," I said. "I thought it was better to do this in person. That was not kindness. I understood that later. She came in person because she wanted to watch me sign. She wanted to be there to take the papers back with her before I had any time to think. I had been married to my wife for 34 years. We met when I was 28 and she was 26, at a barbecue at my friend Roy's house in Flagstaff. She laughed at something I said that wasn't even that funny, and I thought, that's it. That's the one. We had 2 sons. We built a life in the way that people used to build lives, slowly, with our hands, adding rooms to things that mattered. I thought we were still doing that. I was wrong, and I had been wrong for longer than I knew." She slid the envelope toward me. I did not open it right away. I asked her if she wanted to tell me what was going on, and she said there was nothing to explain, that we had grown apart, that she needed something different now. She used phrases that sounded like they had been rehearsed. Maybe they had. She was 60 years old, and she spoke about needing something different the way a woman half her age talks about finding herself. I found out later that she had been seeing someone for 2 years, a man she met at her pottery class. He was 53, recently divorced, owned a vacation property in Sedona. I do not say this with bitterness anymore. I say it because it matters to the rest of the story and because you deserve to understand what was actually happening in that room while I lay there with my legs in casts. She was not leaving me because we had grown apart. She was leaving me because she had already decided where she was going, and she needed to get out before I got back on my feet. I opened the envelope. The papers were real. She had already signed. There was a sticky note with a small arrow pointing to the signature line on my side, the way you see in real estate closings, the polite bureaucratic gesture that says, "Just here, don't think too hard, just sign." I looked at the papers for a long moment. Then I asked her to hand me the pen from the tray table. She did. She was very still when she did it. I think she expected me to argue. I think she had prepared herself for an argument and was slightly off balance when I reached for the pen without raising my voice. I signed. She picked up the papers, tapped them once against the tray table to straighten them, and slid them back into the envelope. "I hope you feel better soon," she said. She left before my son came by that evening. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that I had been on the phone with my attorney 2 days before she walked through that door. His name was Gerald, and he had been my attorney for 20 years, handling contracts and liability issues for my construction business. He was not a divorce attorney. But when I called him from my hospital bed and told him what I thought was coming, he knew exactly who to call. Gerald had driven to the hospital the morning before my wife arrived. He sat in the same chair she would sit in the following day, and we talked for 2 hours. He had already spoken to a family law attorney in his firm, a woman named Patricia who handled high-asset divorces across Arizona. Patricia had told Gerald some things that I needed to hear. Our business, the construction company I had built from a 2-man operation in 1991 to a firm with 11 employees and contracts across 3 counties, was structured as an LLC. My wife was listed as a co-owner on paper because in the early years we had been told that was the smart thing to do for tax purposes. What she did not know was that 18 months earlier, on the advice of my accountant during a routine financial review, I had restructured the ownership. My sons, both adults, had been brought in as managing partners. The restructuring was entirely legal, properly documented, handled by our accountant, and filed correctly. It was done for estate planning purposes, not because I suspected anything. I did not suspect anything at the time, But it meant that when Patricia reviewed what my wife's attorney had filed, the business, its equipment, its contracts, its accounts receivable, was not community property in the way my wife's attorney believed it to be. My wife had built her entire exit strategy around half of that business. Gerald did not tell me to refuse to sign the divorce papers. He told me to sign them if she brought them, because contesting at that stage would only slow things down and cost me more. He told me that the real work had already been done, was being done, would continue to be done in the weeks ahead while I was in physical therapy learning to walk again. So I signed. I signed because Gerald told me to. I signed because Daryl told me to. I signed because Patricia was already 3 steps ahead of my wife's attorney. I signed because 34 years had taught me that the man who stays quiet is often the man who wins. My wife did not know any of that when she picked up that envelope and said she hoped I felt better soon. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life in some ways and the clearest in others. Physical therapy was not what I expected. I had always been strong. I had worked with my hands my entire adult life, and I was not accustomed to my body refusing to cooperate. The first time I tried to stand with the walker, my legs shook so badly that the physical therapist, a young man named Darnell, put both hands on my arms and just held me steady without saying anything. I appreciated that more than I can say. I thought about my wife during those sessions more than I wanted to, not with longing, with the strange, flat grief of realizing that someone you shared a bed with for 3 decades had been planning a life without you for 2 years, possibly longer, while you were making coffee in the morning and watching football on Sunday and believing that the thing you had built together was still standing. My son came to visit twice a week. My older son, who lives in Phoenix, came on weekends. My younger son, who was closer, came on weekday evenings after work and sometimes brought his daughter, my granddaughter, who was 6 and who had recently become very serious about the subject of dinosaurs. She would sit on the edge of my bed and tell me things about pterodactyls with the gravity of a tenured professor. It was the best part of every week. I told my sons about the divorce when I was ready, which was about 10 days after my wife had come and gone with her envelope. They were not as surprised as I expected them to be. That told me something. Children see more than parents know. My older son asked if I needed anything. I told him I needed him to keep quiet about what Gerald and Patricia were working on, and he said he could do that. My younger son did not say much. He sat in the chair by the window for a long time after I told him, and then he said, "Dad, you know this isn't your fault, right?" I told him I was getting there. Patricia filed a response to the divorce petition 4 weeks after my wife submitted the papers. The response was detailed. It outlined the LLC restructuring, the proper documentation, the filing dates, all of it. It also included something else that Patricia had uncovered during discovery, something that changed the shape of everything. 2 years earlier, my wife had refinanced the home equity line of credit on our house. The house was in both our names. The refinance had required both signatures. My signature was on the document. I had not signed that document. I had been in Albuquerque for a 3-week job that summer. I knew the dates exactly because I still had the hotel receipts, the fuel logs, the payroll records from that period showing I was supervising a crew 400 miles away when the signature was dated. Someone had signed my name to a financial document. Someone had borrowed against our shared home without my knowledge and without my presence. Patricia took that to a forensic document examiner. The examiner confirmed that the signature was not mine. I will not tell you that I felt satisfaction when Patricia called me with that news. Satisfaction is not the right word. What I felt was something quieter and heavier than that. The specific weight of understanding that the person you loved had been willing to commit fraud against you and that you had been walking through your life unaware of it, thinking things were hard but fine. The way marriages get hard but fine. The thing about betrayal at 62 is that you do not have the luxury of falling apart the way you might have at 30. You have a business with 11 employees who need their payroll processed. You have a granddaughter who wants to tell you about pterodactyls. You have physical therapy 3 times a week and a walker that you're determined to trade for a cane by the end of the month. You keep moving because stopping is not an option. And because, honestly, the work of keeping yourself upright is a reasonable substitute for grief. I was discharged from the hospital after 5 weeks and moved into my younger son's spare bedroom while the house situation was sorted out. My wife had moved out of the house by then and was, as far as I knew, spending time in Sedona. The house was frozen as a marital asset pending resolution of the fraud matter, which Patricia had reported to the appropriate authorities in addition to raising it in the divorce proceedings. the man from pottery class, I was told by someone who meant well but probably should have stayed quiet, had become noticeably less available once the legal complications became clear. I do not know what my wife thought was going to happen. I have tried to understand the logic of it. The decision to forge a signature, to borrow against a shared home, to build a secret fund that I now understood she had been accumulating for 2 years. I think she believed I would sign without reading carefully. I think she believed the business valuation she had been given was accurate. I think she believed that a man lying in a hospital bed with 2 broken legs, a man who had worked with his hands his whole life and was not, by her accounting, especially sophisticated about financial matters, would take the pen she handed him and do what the arrow on the sticky note said to do. She was not wrong that I took the pen. She was wrong about everything else. Patricia negotiated a settlement over the following 3 months. It was not the settlement my wife's attorney had originally proposed. The equity line of credit, the funds that had been borrowed against our home without my knowledge, those became her liability. The business valuation was corrected to reflect the restructured ownership. The house, once the fraud matter was resolved, was sold, and the proceeds divided according to what Patricia had established in discovery. My wife retained her own retirement accounts and a portion of our joint savings. That was fair. I had no interest in taking everything. I had no interest in punishment. I wanted accuracy. I wanted the truth of what had happened to be reflected in the outcome, and it was. I was walking with a cane by the end of the 3rd month. By the 4th month, I was back at job sites. Not doing the physical work. Not yet, but walking the perimeter, reviewing plans, talking to my crew. Darnell, my physical therapist, had told me that recovery from bilateral fractures at my age was about consistency and stubbornness, and he said the second thing like it was a medical assessment of my character. I chose to take it as a compliment. I moved into an apartment in Tucson in the spring. It is smaller than the house. It has a patio where I have started growing tomatoes, badly because I have never gardened in my life, and apparently it is harder than it looks. My granddaughter comes on Saturday morning sometimes, and she is deeply critical of my tomato operation and offers detailed suggestions that she claims are based on science. I have been asked by people who know the full story whether I am angry, whether I regret signing those papers in the hospital room, whether I wish I had fought harder, said more, made a different choice in that moment. I tell them no. I tell them that the choice I made in that hospital room was the right one, not because it felt powerful in the moment. It did not. It felt like the saddest thing I had ever done. But because it was the choice my attorney told me to make, and because I had learned over 62 years that the men who stay quiet and let the truth catch up to the situation are, more often than not, the ones still standing when the noise finally settles. My wife signed first. She was very sure of herself when she handed me that pen. I think about that sometimes. The certainty of it. The way she sat in that chair and folded her hands and waited for me to do what she expected me to do. I did what she expected me to do. It just turned out that what she expected me to do. It just turned out that what she expected and what was actually happening were 2 entirely different things. The tomatoes are doing better this month. My granddaughter says I finally got the watering schedule right. She reviewed my progress last Saturday with the same expression she uses when she talks about the Cretaceous period. Entirely serious, slightly concerned, cautiously optimistic. I told her I thought I was getting the hang of it. She said she'd believe it when she saw a real tomato. I think that's fair. I think that's exactly fair.